Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation. Connect with us on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to our channel at Grade Level Reading. There you can see all of our previous webinar recordings. On LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on X, follow us at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to reshare. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce today's webinar. Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our enterprise and programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. Thank you. As we get started, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping details with you. First, we'd love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select everyone so that we all know who is here, and feel free to share your thoughts and insights throughout the duration of the webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. Our panelists will be typing out responses to your questions throughout the entirety of the conversation, and we'll dedicate the last portion of the webinar to respond to the questions you post. The webinar is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. A link to the recording, as well as any slides, bios, and resources, will be sent in a follow-up email to all who registered. And lastly, we'll be posting a brief on-screen poll during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. And before I pass it off, I just wanted to highlight some of our upcoming webinars. Next week on April 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern, we hope that you'll join us for our return to our Kindergarten Matters series with this session on effective elementary principles. On May 6th, we'll have a Crucible of Practice Salon at 12:30 p.m., focused on First 10 communities in York, Pennsylvania, and how they are incorporating early math and young mathematicians initiative. And that same day at 3 p.m., we will be having a partner webinar with Schools as Safe Spaces Beyond Active Shooter Drills to Trusting Relationships. More information on all of these sessions and future sessions will be posted in the chat box now, as well as the registration links, and we hope you can join us. And joining you now is John Gomperts, Executive Fellow with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy.
Thanks, Sierra, as always. And thanks to everyone for joining today. And thanks to also Hillary for her great work behind the scenes. We gathered right after the turn of the new year to hear thoughts on what to expect from the new administration. And we had a whole bunch of these guests, plus one new one today. I have to say that in the 105 days since we gathered, that was January 7th, and in the 92 days since President Trump was sworn in, well, let's just say a lot has happened. Now, look, we asked our guests back on January 7th to make a set of predictions, and they did. And predictions are fun, but they're fraught. And we could spend a bunch of time checking on how our guests did with their prediction. But that doesn't really seem very productive and constructive. And it's not really in keeping with the way that the campaign rolls. Let's just agree things haven't really unfolded the way any of us thought they might when we convened back in early January. But the level of surprise is hardly limited to the world of education and kids. Not very much has unfolded just the way folks thought it would. In fact, there's been, I would say, a head-spinning amount of news in the first 3 months of this new administration. And sometimes I think that the cumulative impact of all that activity makes it seem that actions in a particular area that one might be interested in are bigger than they actually are. Or at the same time, the sheer volume of large-scale action can make big changes seem small because there are perhaps other things or everything else that is happening. So even for those of us who pay a lot of attention, or maybe particularly for those of us who pay a lot of attention, too much attention, it's easy to lose the plot. So we've invited our friends back to try to make sense of where we are and to look forward a little for the big issues, opportunities, and challenges that lie ahead. Um, we are hoping that our friends will help us clear up the distractions and refine that core plot and sort out, make sense of what has and what hasn't happened in the world of kids and education and what other things might or might not happen. As always, we want to keep our focus in the same place that the campaign always focuses: the learning conditions, experiences, supports, and opportunities for children who hail from economically fragile families and those who are coming up in historically marginalized communities. Today, we're going to have the whole conversation all together. I've made clear to our guests that I hope they will seize and share the reins of this conversation with me, that they talk to each other and build on and explore each other's points of view, and that they feel free to disagree, though we would prefer if they disagreed somewhat agreeably. And we want to know what you're confused and curious about. So please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to work your questions into the conversation as we go along. With that, let me introduce, and it's really mostly reintroduce, some of the campaign's closest friends, allies, and thought partners. As always, full bios are linked in the chat, so check them out if you need to know more about our friends. Jean-Claude Brizard is the CEO of Digital Promise and many other things. Denise Forte is the president and CEO of Education Trust. Kevin Huffman is back with us. He is the CEO of Accelerate. Mike Petrilli is the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. That whole crew was with us back in January. They're the ones whose predictions we're not going to check on. And we have one new guest to add to the mix, Robin Lake, who is the director of the Center on Reinventing Public Education. Robin wasn't able to join us back in January, but she did make a bold list of predictions last year, and we'll post the link to those predictions in the chat. Welcome and thanks to all of you. Now let's get right to it. So if everybody could join on screen, that would be fabulous. So many things have happened, you guys. It's been just like, wow. I am curious what you think is the most surprising thing that's happened in the first 3 months of this administration. Mike, why don't you kick us off?
Well, thank you, John. And hey, great to see everybody. Nice to be back here. There's so many things, right? But I think from my perspective, going after IES, burning it to the ground, has to count as the most surprising action. I don't think any of us had that on our bingo card because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't line up with anything that we heard President Trump say on the campaign trail. It has not been something that conservatives or the MAGA movement have been really focused on. And so it really does feel like it came out of left field. Now, I will say that because it still doesn't make a lot of sense, I am hopeful that it might be fixed and that there's still some potential that the administration will work to rebuild IES better and stronger. Look, that may just be wishful thinking, but I got to be optimistic about that. To me, that's been the most surprising thing. I've got many others on my list, but why don't I let the rest of them get in here?
All right, let's let others jump in. Denise, what's been surprising to you?
Hi, everyone. So good to be back. And I look forward to this conversation as always. For us at the Education Trust, it was really the dizzying speed in which they went after IES and CES, the employees at the Department of Education, getting rid of the Office of Civil Rights throughout the country, the regional offices. With really, sort of a lack of appreciation of the rule of law. I think both of those things really caught us off guard. And honestly, as we look forward, I'm hoping that as a community, we can get much better and mostly about how we stand up, um, and not so much resist, but stand up. I think that's what's needed right now.
Great. Thanks for that opening. Kevin, what surprised you?
It's a target-rich environment. Thanks for having me back, despite being just radically off base and wrong the first time. Appreciate us not
No, it makes
revisiting some of
even
that.
better. Makes it even better. I'm not listing all the things that you predicted.
There are a lot of things to go with. I'm going to say the canceling of the ESSER extension and the idea that out of the blue, we would just send out a letter to everybody saying, all of you who got an extension on your ESSER funding and submitted thoughtful plans, you should have spent it before. And it was surprising, both because it sort of signals that any agreements that you had in the past that you were basing your work off of, I wouldn't count too much on those. And also just the idea that you should have spent it when, in fact, the places that had requested extensions were in many cases the ones that were being most thoughtful about how they thought about their spending over time in learning recovery.
Really good. Robin?
All great points. I would just add, I think what surprised me the most was that there really was no plan. There still really is no plan for improving student achievement in the US. So I remember when I first read Project 2025 before the election, I thought, they sort of framed up the whole case around declining test scores and, pandemic impacts and international competitiveness. And then there was nothing there about, what we know actually improves achievement in kids. Everything else was just a bunch of rhetorical, ideological sort of jabs and moves that really weren't grounded in any kind of evidence base. And I thought, well, okay, that there must be a plan somewhere though, somewhere. So I keep looking for it, and still I've seen no sign that there actually is a plan. And in fact, I believe the Secretary of Education has sort of said when asked, what's the plan, we're working on it. And that's what's really most concerning to me.
Really good. Thank you. Jean-Claude?
Yeah, John, I think a lot has been said, and I agree with everything, but let me double down perhaps on two and one that hasn't been said. So I agree completely with the IES. That was a surprise, a complete surprise, given the need, frankly, for the integration of learning science into what we know works for kids. The doubling down of the science of reading and the work that we need to do, frankly, around the country. That was a surprise to me. But I would say the one that hasn't been mentioned was the gutting of the Office of Education Technology. And I know the president's about to come out with an executive order on AI in K-12 education. The team that would be really handling that and working on that would be the Office of Ed Tech, traditionally. So to have no one there, I'm going to be really interested to see how they're going to look to execute that across the country. Given the proliferation of education technology across the US, for that team to be disbanded, frankly, has been a massive surprise to me, not counting the 130 plus executive orders that come our way. And I love your push around the idea of looking to not lose, it's easy to lose the plot, I think is what you said, John. But we have to figure out quickly the thread and keep our eye focused on what matters in our classrooms. But that whole disbanding of the Office of Ed Tech was a massive surprise to me.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping you guys, I pay a lot of attention and I know a fair amount about this stuff. And I have to tell you, I've kind of lost the plot. I can't tell what's important and what's noise. That line about sorting out the signal and the noise is really, really complicated right now. So I'm hoping that's part of what we can accomplish in this conversation. You all raised a bunch of really important points that I hope we'll come back to. And I hope well, let me just ask, anything else that rises like to the super surprised level that you didn't get to mention? Mike, you mentioned you had a couple of things, more things on your list. Anything else that folks want to mention about, like, whoa, I did not think that was going to happen?
Well, look, I know it's so far the tone has been somber, and I understand why. But there are some things that I think some of us were worried about happening that haven't happened, at least not yet. So, for example, despite all the rhetoric about moving everything back to the states, the administration has not indicated that they are willing to let states get out of the federal law's requirements around testing and accountability. I think that's a big deal. It's also the case that, almost all of the money in terms of Title I grants, IDEA grants, most of the competitive grants are still flowing. So, as disappointing as people may be in many of these actions, I mean, look, compared to, say, USAID, where not only did they fire everybody, but they've also stopped funding all those incredibly important services overseas. In education, if you're in a school or a classroom, so far, it's probably pretty hard to tell the difference because the money keeps going. I think that's important. That one other thing, though, that I just put on the table is I often think it's not the education stuff that has the biggest impact on schools. It's the other stuff. And the big thing, the other stuff from my perspective, is this terrible trade war and the likelihood that it will lead to a terrible recession. And we know recessions are bad for kids. They're especially bad for kids from disadvantaged families. It's bad for education spending. It's bad for the child poverty rate. So, to see this trade war being waged in such a ham-fisted way, and in a way that almost seems guaranteed, again, we're terrible at predicting, but seems very likely to drive the country into a recession in a way that could do serious damage to our schools, among many other things.
I think Mike's right. I was just going to add, the other thing that should be causing all of us to pay greater attention is what will happen with Medicaid, since so many of our children in schools are supported by Medicaid. What happens around child nutrition when we already know that they have shut down the farmers markets programs that were supported and other programs that have been traditionally supporting kids in schools. We absolutely have to keep our eye on that. And, that is definitely part of the signal. I think it's all signaling a real attack on families. And as Mike just pointed out, like if we go into a recession without these safety nets of Medicaid, of SNAP, of child nutrition, our families are going to be in big trouble.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that Mike's great track record in prediction, when he predicts there's going to be a recession, means there won't be a recession. I can't bank on that, but let's hope for that. Kevin, let me come to you about this question about Medicaid for a second. As I understand it, there are two big challenges around Medicaid. One is what Denise mentioned already, this specific concerns around health of children and people in their families that can have a disruptive impact on kids' ability to attend school and pay attention and so forth. But the other is just this squeezing of state budgets, and so that's why I want to come to you, ask you how you're thinking about these things that are not what we think of as quote unquote education, but could have a huge impact on kids.
Yeah, I mean, combining Denise and Mike's point, I do think there's this very real challenge for state budgets. And a lot of times the state budget for education winds up being a lagging indicator. And so you can sort of squeeze by for an extra year. But then when the hammer comes, it comes hard. And in states, Medicaid and education are the two biggest cost drivers. And so if the states have to backfill a federal shortfall in education, I mean, in Medicaid, if they are looking at their budgets saying Medicaid is being cut at the federal level, we're going to have to make up for it at the state level, we're going to have to put more resources in there. It is a fixed pie in state budgets. And then you throw in the potential for less tax collections. And all of a sudden, education starts to get squeezed pretty hard. I was in a meeting recently where somebody said something else that I think was a little disconcerting. Said, in the past, when we've had budget crises in states on education, what you could count on was just the unwavering public support for public schools and education. But when that has eroded in public polling over time, you run the risk that there's less of a sort of rallying to the cause, and everybody's going to ensure that public funding for schools gets protected. So you've got all of these things that come together. And the reality is we're not very good at absorbing cuts in education. A 5% cut in education can be devastating because we're not very good at managing the budgets because so much of it's personnel.
Yeah. Jean-Claude, I saw you nodding your head. You want to add anything here?
No, John, I mean, to Kevin's point, my vantage point has been as a school superintendent. And to know quickly a small percentage of cuts from the feds or from the state, how it flows has a massive impact, frankly, on the work that we need to do. I'm looking at some of the questions on Head Start in the chat. When I was in Rochester, New York, we made a concerted effort to offer universal pre-K to 3-year-olds. A lot of funding came from the state, and frankly, from our local support. Without that kind of effort to support 3 and 4-year-olds, frankly, we would never see the gains that we want to see up in the upper grade levels. So one hopes that education funding is not going to be touched in a way that will impact what happens in our classroom. It goes back to this idea of the thread, the idea of the plot. John, for me, I was thinking about the plot as one where we make sure we sort of keep whole what happens in our schools and classrooms and keep the noise and the distraction as far away as possible, right? So some of us, where we sit, can worry about federal policy, what is happening with executive orders, but ultimately we want to make sure our teachers and school leaders are doing the work they need to get done without a distraction that may come from outside of their school system.
Yeah, Jean-Claude, well, Catherine, my wife, we keep having this conversation, like there's all this stuff that's happening, but what effect is it having, like way down at the ground level? There's a lot of headline stuff, but what does it mean at the ground level? So for us, as we think about the things we're talking about today, what is showing up, or what do we think will show up for kids, for families, for teachers, and when do we think that stuff will show up? That's a huge question. Now, it's also possible that Bridget's pointing something out in the chat right now. Across all the sectors where I encounter people, whether they're people who make toys or do finance or work in public policy or in international, everything is disrupted right now. As I think Mike said at the beginning, everything's disrupted. So everybody's off balance and doesn't really know what to expect. So I think there are lots of people who may already be feeling these effects. And I don't know whether that's from the school level or from the family level, but for us, we can all sit around and talk about, what's going to happen in the office of this or that. But for the campaign, what's really interesting and important is what's going to happen for kids and families and those who interact with kids and families, educators, teachers, and so forth. What do you think about that? What are you watching for right now around policy at the high level, but also as all the things, education and other things are happening, things directly related to education and other things are happening. What are you watching for indicators that things are different? Jean-Claude, it was your thought to start. So you continue on, then I'm going to come to others.
John, I look at it from both vantage points, right? So I think about the past and what works in really moving student level outcome. It really is about that relationship between students, teachers, parents, and instructional materials. So how we create that kind of support for that level of interaction on the positive end is the work that we've always wanted to do as school people. When you have on the other side, noise and distractions and all kinds of rituals happening above the school classroom, how do you protect them from that kind of interaction? So what I watch for is the focus of school superintendents and their requisite focus on school leadership. To make sure that we're protecting what's happening in our classrooms, to make sure they're efficacious. So when I've had the chance of actually meeting with the secretary, what I asked for and I try to understand is what is the level of support and for the states. If we're going to devolve power and money to the states, that's fine. I have no issue with that. But on the other side, you have to build capacity at the grassroots level and state level to support that kind of coherence of work that's happening in our classrooms. Without that, frankly, if you're not building capacity, you're just pushing power down, you're going to maybe have, I don't know, maybe not 50, but something 30 or 25 places where we don't have innovation actually happening in our schools. As a leader in my own organization, my goal is to keep my team focused on that plot, on the thread of the work that we need to do to make sure that we are changing and improving what's happening for kids in schools.
Kevin, Jean-Claude's talking about this from a superintendent level, but we have a quote from you from, I think it was an NPR story, around 50 different things happening around the country. Talk about this a little from a state level.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is clear, to the extent people in education were sort of waiting for some central guidance from the federal Department of Education on what's our big plan to help kids, that's not happening. And so there really is this impetus on states to step up, define their plan, define their objectives, define what they need, and then execute strategies. I would say arguably states have had a fair amount of autonomy and ability to do that, especially in the last 10 years. And some have really taken advantage of it. Some have not. And I think it's important for all of us in the field to enable the leaders that have high quality plans that are going to actually drive forward student outcomes and to put pressure on the places that are not delivering outcomes for kids. Because when you look at what's happened in Mississippi in reading and in math, in Louisiana in reading in the last NAEP test, in DC over an extended period of time, and in reading and in math, in Tennessee, there are places that have made real progress based on state and local level plans and leadership. But the pressure is not going to come from the federal government. The pressure is going to have to come from people on the ground in all of these different places.
Yeah, Denise, I want to come to you about that, about this question of pressure and accountability, because obviously Kevin's right. There are places that have made progress, and it's actually probably principally been because of inspired state leadership and high quality implementation and so forth. Other places have not done so well. If the federal government is not going to be the vehicle of accountability, it may be that it's creates some of the data that allows others to hold folks accountable. But how do you think about accountability in places that don't have the inspired leadership and strong plans that Kevin alluded to?
Yeah, some of the things that I've actually been more hopeful about are examples where coalitions are coming together in states and in communities to either push back or raise up some really important issues. Just recently, today even, or maybe yesterday, in Tennessee, community players, through strong community engagement, they were able to push back on state actions to overturn Plyler. That is a big deal. In other places, Utah, for example, looks like vouchers aren't going to happen there for the time being. But yeah, through active coalitions, through active community engagement, we are seeing some successful examples. But all of these things have to work in tandem. Really great leaders want really great community engagement, and they want the science of what works, and they want support, from the education stakeholders and others. Really great leaders are able to do that. I think without that is where you start to see some of the challenges that we've seen over the past 10 years, as Kevin had mentioned, when states were given a very decent amount of autonomy to try different things.
Yeah.
And we now know that many of them decided to look away.
Yeah. Robin, let me come to you for a second. We've been talking about some of the concerns raised by the disruption, but as we know, disruption also creates opportunity, creates new flexibility where everything seemed ossified, breaks apart large chunks of ice. So as you look at what's happening, I know that you have some concerns, but I know also that you think possibly there's some space for opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing, what that's making you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so right after the election, I talked with my staff. We're fiercely nonpartisan. We just always are. And my message to my staff was, look, we're for change. We always have been. We have been for 30 years. We've been documenting the case for change. It's needed. A response right now from us or from anyone just trying to protect the status quo is really going to be ignoring the reality that we've been looking at. For example, coming out of the pandemic, we're not doing well. As Kevin said, we don't absorb budget issues very well in education. We've got to change that. Special education needs dramatic shifts. We weren't holding adults accountable in meaningful ways. We were not providing enough high quality choices to families and informing them about how their kids were really doing. We have so much work ahead. And so that, I think right now what I'm looking for is a response from communities and states that says, look, burning it down isn't going to get us to where we need to be for our kids. We need to have a plan, but neither is protecting the status quo. And so I'm looking for creative ideas, bold ideas that can move folks forward in meaningful ways, and ways that we can start to bridge the differences so people can come together around those ideas instead of this crazy division. I think there's so much opportunity for that. And we've been putting out writings and thinkings about this, we're getting such good response from people. I think people are hungry for constructive ideas, but ones that recognize we actually do have to do some things radically differently.
Mike, I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Where you're seeing opportunity here.
Yes. No, I mean, let's get real about some things, okay? When you think about what happened at the Department of Education, we would all say this was a terrible way to address what might have been some serious issues around bloat or performance. And yet, that's a cop-out, right? Because there have been administrations, Democratic and Republican, who have done nothing about the fact that when you get a job as a federal employee after your probationary period, you basically have lifelong tenure. I worked in the Department of Ed back in the George W. Bush days. There were some efforts to try to do something about this, and they failed, right? Probably the last real effort was Al Gore in reinventing government. So, the Doge bros come in here, and they decide if the choice is either status quo, which is basically, hey, there's nothing we can do. There's just going to be bloat. There's going to be some low performers. you're just basically can't deal with it. Or what they've done, which is we're going to just chop away at big chunks of federal agencies, because that is allowable, right? You can't actually go one by one and eliminate low performers. You got to get rid of whole chunks of the agency. And they chose to do that. I would not have made that choice because I think it could do real damage, but I understand that decision. Well, does this sound familiar at all to anybody else? We have a school system, or 14,000 school systems, that have similar issues, right? I mean, the fact that, here we are in 2025 and we all just take it as a given that once a teacher has tenure in America, that's it. They can't be fired unless they do something terrible. And we just take that as a given. And I think that kind of, or that, on the other side, that we all know that we should be paying teachers more, but we can't ever get that done either. Because we keep choosing to hire more teachers instead of higher quality teachers. Go down the list of things that we know are dysfunctional about our system. Robin said, special education not working, right? And people have kind of tried and failed to reform. And when that happens, then the idea of revolution becomes very appealing. Okay, so what I'm worried about and watching is, what is the zeitgeist like that going to look like at the state and local level? Now, what I worry about is that you're going to see in red states a more, people saying, hey, let's do Doge for school districts and be aggressive and maybe make some of the same mistakes in a way that could really harm our school system. And I worry that in blue states, there's going to be a sense of, well, we have to defend the institutions, defend the status quo, and we're going to continue to have this stasis. And in fact, what we need is kind of the opposite, right? I mean, red states are doing a lot of good reforms, in my opinion. They should probably be spending more money. Blue states aren't hardly doing anything in terms of reform. They are spending some money. That's about it, right? We need reform and resources. I mean, that's been the recipe forever. So I just think we have to be honest that if we fail at reform, we invite revolution. That has happened at the federal level, and it could happen at the state and local level as well.
Kevin, what's your thought about that? This, the disruption versus the all the discomfort that comes with the disruption.
I mean, first of all, I think there are a number of people who have in fact not taken it for granted that teachers should just have lifetime tenure and that we shouldn't care about quality and so on. And there are a whole lot of people who have taken that on over time. The thing, honestly, that's crazy about the whole Doge thing, Mike, and you think about the length of time that we attempted to build a centrist coalition led by people on the right to stop tolerating LIFO policies in school districts. And then we came in and we LIFO'd the federal government as if that was somehow going to lead to better governance for us. It's crazy. And like so many of the tear it down policies, you have to have some back end rebuilding strategy that goes alongside it. You're going to take the sledgehammer because you've got this vision for what you're going to build. And, when I ran a state agency, we did a full restructuring of the agency, but it wasn't, let's just blow everything up because Tennessee's 46th in results. It was, what would a high quality agency that functions, that serves kids look like? And it sure would be nice to see more of that.
Yeah, Robin, that comes back to what you were talking about at the top of the show. Like, okay, but what's the plan for improving student achievement?
Yeah. I also will say that, when I've talked to friends about, hey, if you were going to blow something up, what would you blow up? Department of Ed is not at the top of the list. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of bureaucracy in education. It's in school districts, and it's in, dysfunctional school boards, and it's in ed schools that, really are not doing their jobs for teachers. I mean, there's so many problems that could be blown up and replaced really effectively if the blowups were targeted, but really combined with thoughtful investments in rebuilding. So, yeah, I mean, I just think we need, I do think there is a real need right now for a set of new ideas and some coming together of people that can say, you don't have a plan, but we do. We do. And whether that comes from the local level, which I think is most effective, or it's facilitated at the state level, potentially at the national level. But for example, a national campaign on literacy, every kid reading by 3rd grade, which I know you all are working on or for, that feels like something that, the feds could agree on, communities could agree on. We could just get going and say, how we're going to get it done.
So, Denise, let me come to you because you guys know who our audience is. It's a bunch of exactly the kind of people who Robin was just talking about: community coalitions, activists, civic leaders, organizations. It feels to me like there may be some leadership vacuum created by the disruption that's happening, and that in the sort of balance of power, the physics of how things happen, Robin may be onto something that community coalitions could actually have a much louder voice in this next world, and that there's real opportunity if people can get folks to come together around some big ideas and some big moves, and be supportive of those. There may be more space for that. Do you feel that too, Denise?
I do. I think there's a desperate need to rebuild a centrist coalition. As Robin and Mike have pointed out over and over again to me, the many places that we get to share space, there is also a dearth of new ideas, and we need to be getting those on paper. What does a high school graduate look like? Should we be thinking about not just graduation as the end point, but what's after that? I think we did a disservice, honestly, just thinking about graduation from high school as the end point for young people, because families want to know how their kids are going to thrive and survive and build a family for themselves and have a great job. And so we should be about delivering that as well. Totally agree with Robin about reading and math and the fundamentals. Those are absolutely things that we need to tackle, alongside making sure that someone is accountable at every level. School boards, school leaders, state leaders, governors, all of which would have a role in a new scenario where you're actually putting good ideas on the table.
Jean-Claude,
Yeah.
go.
No. I wanted to jump in. So I'm all about revolution, and I appreciate Mike's push in that direction because there's a level of frustration, particularly what we have not been able to accomplish in education. As I get older, I get more impatient about what we actually need to get done. But I want to support the other push around a plan. So blow it up, yes, but you must have a plan on the other end. And there's real frustration. For example, with What Works Clearinghouse, right? That has not done what it was meant or supposed to do. Making science or evidence really actionable and supporting the practitioner. That really hasn't happened. 25 years we've known about the science of reading, yet it's only beginning to permeate the ed sector, right? We did a paper with the Hoover Institution, and Mike was a part of that sort of like the chapter that we have in this particular document. We found that the most amount of regulation that came on the classroom of schools, multifold, came from state regulation, not the federal regulation. So are we targeting the bureaucracy in the right places is ultimately the question. But I think there are real opportunities to your earlier question, John, about that it could happen here. One, can we build a better IES? Can we build a better What Works Clearinghouse? Can we effectively look at things like science and making sure it's making its way into our classroom and really impacting pedagogy and curriculum, et cetera? There are real opportunities here, but there's got to be a cogent, sensible way of thinking about how we actually move in that direction. Yes, let's blow it up, but let's also have a way forward on the other end. Otherwise, all we're going to be left with is chaos.
I want to ask you guys, I want to jump around a little around some hot issues, some of which have been mentioned in the questions. But I want to start with a question that's been, I think we've talked about it before, but it's been really on the mind of those of us at the campaign, that so much is based on a sort of prevailing narrative that nothing works, that everything sucks and nothing works. And that can give rise to change, but it can also give rise to just a feeling of deflation, defeatism, fatalism. And that's especially true with respect to investments that support kids who are growing up in economically fragile families and in communities that have struggled for a whole bunch of reasons. So, how do you balance this narrative that, I mean, it showed up in this conversation that we are not satisfied with what we're doing. This is not okay, but not get to the point where everything stinks and we got to throw the whole thing out because nothing works. Um, Denise, how do you strike that balance?
I just can't agree with you more. We've been thinking about this a lot at Ed Trust. The prevailing narrative in sadly, sometimes it's down at the classroom level, is that our children of color, children from low-income communities can't succeed, right? No matter what is done.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is there are pockets of success across this country. We just need more of them. There are teachers and school leaders and communities that have figured it out, that are using the evidence to support our children and are seeing that success. They're seeing that performance. But it's only in pockets. You know, the big question is, how do we elevate the narrative that there are, and Kevin even put some of them down, there are things that are working and we're seeing results. Unfortunately, we get sidelined by culture wars and all this other nonsense that's not doing any child any good.
Robin, the name of your organization is the Center for, Reinvention. So it carries this notion that at a minimum things aren't as good as they should be, but maybe this notion that we're spending all this money, spending all this time, there are all these people who are working on this and nothing's working. How do you balance sort of a positive view of what public education has done and can do with the instinct to reinvent?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first step is always to admit you have a problem. That's the first of 12 steps. So, we should not be afraid of that. We should be afraid. We should look our problems squarely in the face. And we do a lot of documenting on that front. We have an annual State of the American Student report that we put out. Got to look at the cold hard facts. But we're also researchers, and there are so many things that we know work, and that goes to my first point about kind of lack of plan, lack of looking to the past to inform the future. So I will, spent a lot of my career, along with many of our colleagues on the panel, looking at school choice, what works to make high quality options work for all families, not just those who are most advantaged or have time to, construct their child's education on a daily basis. And we have so many lessons on that front about how to make choice work for students with special needs, for low-income families, investing in an infrastructure around transportation and information for parents. And there are loads and loads of lessons learned there, and investing in high quality supply, really critical. So we could tackle, any of the topics that we're taking on here in this conversation and say, we know a lot about what works. What we know is also, though, that the pockets that Denise referred to are there for a reason. There are systemic barriers in policy and practice and habits and attitudes in public education that we need to take on. And so, when we think about things like reinventing IES, we're saying, we need to actually double down on building evidence about what works on literacy, math, things like AI, and such an important area that we need to get ahead of. But we also need to invest in understanding better what prevents implementation and spread of those things. We have ideas about that. We have some evidence, but we need to be clear about that and be talking about those things as well.
John, can I jump in quickly on this? So, I mean, when I was a superintendent, I leaned quite a bit on the Ed Trust and the PowerPoints they used to produce. I use them all of the time to showcase what works and effectively what we can bring into our own school system. I'm a big fan of SERP. I still go to their site to mine stuff. I'm going to put a couple of things as examples of what we need to do better in education. We don't share very well. Sometimes across the hallway, sometimes across the school, across systems. I just came back from Pittsburgh a few weeks ago, where 13 districts to remake learning, supported by the Grable Foundation, a local foundation, 13 districts working together to push innovation forward. Not the state, but a regional effort, which is really amazing. It's in the website here. We also have this thing that was created by Arnie Duncan about 12 years ago, called the League of Innovative Schools. All 13 in Pittsburgh are members of that particular community. So again, they are amazing pockets or regional pockets of success in this country that we can learn from. What we don't do very well, typically, is codify and share to make sure, again, it can be replicated in context to other parts of our country. So there are places like EdTrust, SERP, will do this amazing kind of work, and that we don't do very well of sharing across the entire community of educators.
John.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and I think that all this is great, and I think we also need to think about reminding people that there was a time that we were making a lot of progress. It was not that long ago, right? That there was tremendous progress from the 90s into the 2000s, in some places like Tennessee, Kevin, into the 2010s with great leadership as well. But then it stopped. And a lot of us have been trying to figure out what happened and how do we get back to some of that. And there's new challenges and there's phones now, and that's probably a big problem. But fundamentally, I think there were some good policies, like the focus on accountability, like the focus on high quality charter schools, but there was also good vibes, right? The zeitgeist. I mean, left, right, and center at the national, state, local level, there was agreement that raising student achievement was super important, that closing achievement gaps, super important, right? That education mattered, that it mattered, that of course kids might be born with different gifts, but helping everybody achieve their potential would make a big difference and make our country better if we were able to do those things. And we got away from that. We got distracted by other stuff. Some of it was culture war stuff that I think there were some people out there maliciously pulling our attention away. And other times I think it was maybe well-meaning things, right? But that got us off track, right? That there was an ideology that came in that started to question maybe, equity. When we think about equity, we shouldn't even be talking about achievement gaps, because somehow that in itself is racist to point out that there are these racial achievement gaps. And over time, the conversation, the zeitgeist, all over the place changed, where suddenly raising achievement, closing achievement gaps wasn't job number one. And guess what? We haven't been raising achievement or closing achievement gaps. So I think that demonstrates that these ideas, the ideas really do matter. And so some of this stuff is hard. Some of what I talked about earlier, being able to fire bad teachers, okay, I know that's hard, right? Being able to raise funding dramatically, that's hard. But some of this other stuff that's around ideology should be changeable. I mean, we are seeing, for example, on reading, there was an ideology in place for a long time in lots of places that did not allow us to use the science of reading. And that now has been changing. That's great. We need similar ideological change. So for example, absolutely, we got to worry about discipline disparities, but we can't have this answer be that we're just going to give up on disciplining kids who are misbehaving, right? I mean, that's just common sense. Grading. You can't just say grading for equity and pretend that we don't have to hold kids accountable for working hard and doing their work. Guess what? We ease up on that. They don't work as hard. They don't learn as much. I mean, these kinds of ideas don't need to be left, right, and center. They're not about the unions. They're not about politics per se. They're just about, hey, how do you run highly effective schools? And back in the 2000s, there was a sense that, we would fight about a lot of this stuff, but that we were all trying to figure out what is the best way to raise achievement and close achievement gaps? If we can get back to that North Star, I think we'll be in much better shape.
And that also requires state and national leadership. I mean, it was exactly right, Mike. You know, you're calling out the 90s when governors were getting together and said, this matters. And we had a strong federal role with outspoken leaders that were not going to settle for less.
Kevin, I want to come back to you on this. Mike suggested that we lost the plot, a different plot, not, you know, the nuttiness that's happening every day in Washington, but we lost the plot on paying attention to student achievement, that we had it going on for a while. We actually made a lot of progress and we took our eye off the ball. And that if we had leadership at every level, from national to state to local, from inside, from outside, that was really focused on student achievement as a top goal, this would be going in the right direction a lot more. What do you think about that? You subscribe to what Mike said?
100%. I think he's completely right. It pains me to say it, but I think Mike Petrilli is 100% right on this. I think the point on accountability in the zeitgeist is totally dead on. And I think we stopped having the conversations that started and ended with student outcomes. And we talked a whole lot about inputs instead. And it does make a huge difference. And if you look at the places that have made the most progress, those are places where if you go into them at the state and the local level, you are going to have conversations about student achievement in a measurable way. People will be able to talk to you about data and results. And it matters. I mean, Mississippi is 7th in the country in 4th grade reading. They were 49th not very long ago. Like, this is a movable, changeable situation. And just one thing that I think is important to point out as we think about state action in a world where we go into states being the epicenter, I think, of leadership from this point forward, the states that get results are willing to make school districts do things. They are willing to drive change from the state down to the local level, and they do not default to, we're a local control state, we can't tell people what to do. And regretfully, I hear more and more, we're a local control state from blue states and not from red states, which I find wild. But you can't tell me you're a local control state as if somehow Mississippi does not believe in local control, and yet they were able to take a central vision for reading and drive it down through districts into the classroom.
So,
John, on the other side, though, I love accountability, and I completely agree with Mike and Kevin. But what I also want to say is that those states also know how to support local leadership. As a former superintendent, when my state chief in New York, for example, at times flanked me and supported when I had governance issues, dealing with at times dysfunctional school boards, those were really foundational in supporting the work that I had to get done. Without a kind of flanking of support from a state chief, particularly if I'm left floating in the wind by myself, I won't last very long as a leader. So that kind of support needs to come as well in protecting and supporting local leadership and doing the work that they have to get done quickly for classroom, for outcomes to be where we want them to be.
I'm hearing a theme here that it reminds me of that old movie Network, which probably a lot of people watching are not old enough to have watched. But I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Except that the mad as hell got sort of distracted onto a bunch of side issues rather than I'm mad about student achievement and we're going to do something about student achievement and we're willing to sacrifice a lot of things to really drive student achievement. I want to hit a couple of questions that people have raised in the Q&A. One is, we talked about some of the stuff external to quote unquote education that could have a huge impact on the lives of kids and the learning possibilities of kids. We talked about Medicaid, and there are other things like Medicaid, and there's things outside the formal school system. I wonder about immigration. This is obviously a very dynamic area in policy and in action. It is something that really does touch people very quickly. I'm curious what you think about the impact of all that's going on in the world of immigration on education. Denise, you want to give us a start on that?
Yeah, I mean, the probably most significant thing is kids are afraid to show up at school, and we know what that means when they can't, be supported in a safe classroom. Families afraid to send their children to school, also a big deal. But this example that I cited in Tennessee, there will be other states that will attempt to do the same thing, where they want to say that undocumented students in their states should not be, educated in public schools. That is a sort of an opportunity or an attempt to try to get Plyler reversed at the Supreme Court level. So we'll be seeing more of that, where immigration status and education are gonna really have a direct conflict. There were other examples. The Biden administration attempted to let TRIO programs accept undocumented students. That didn't go through. I remember back in the 90s when California tried to do the same thing. So there's no doubt that the ongoing immigration debate is going to have an impact on students and teachers ultimately, in terms of their ability to educate young people, and their ability to continue to add to the classroom, for sure.
Mike, you were the first one to raise this question of things outside of the formal world of education having an impact. How do you think about this immigration?
Oh yeah, no, this has always been the thing I've worried about the most since the election. And so far, we've seen, of course, some of the terrible disappearing of people, adults, to this prison in El Salvador, but we haven't yet seen the mass deportations that have been promised. But the reporting is that the administration remains committed to doing that, and so yeah, I think this remains something that should be at the top of our list in terms of concerns. And look, those of us that lean right, got to do everything we can to remind people that, Ronald Reagan was the kind of person who said we should have a big, opening door to this country. And this is not feel like something that is in line with our values.
Yeah. John, can I take a slightly...
I just wanted to suggest that folks take a look at some recent news coverage of Alberto Carvalho, the superintendent of LA Unified School District, speaking on this issue. He had some incidents in his schools, I believe it was last week. I felt that he provided such strong leadership in defending the actions that they took to protect the rights of kids and families, and doing it in a very, very thoughtful, effective way. It just goes back to, I think, Jean-Claude's point that yes, this is has heavy, significant issue on families, educators at the school level. It's also a systems question. Our system leaders are already under fire. They're going to continue to be, and this issue, other issues, we've got to provide them cover right now.
Robin, I thank you for saying that. As I watched his interview, I couldn't, John, but think about my own personal experience. I have parents who were undocumented in this country. As an immigrant to the U.S., I won an award a year and a half ago from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, calling me Great American, Great Immigrant. People like me wouldn't be here if it wasn't for immigration, if it wasn't for birthright citizenship. So I appreciate that, Robin. I love listening to Carvalho. Let me take this to perhaps a learning science perspective, John, around the issues of immigration. We know that stress can impact the learning centers of the brain, stress from poverty, etc. I have to imagine what perhaps a grade level child is going through right now when their parents are really afraid, and that kind of stressing what it means for their own learning in classrooms and schools. Yes, about teachers as well too. But if you're terrified, if you're scared, if you're stressed out as a child, whether you're 8 or 17 years of age, right? It has to impact the way in which you're learning. So if we really want to have the kinds of outcomes we're looking for, we have to understand the psychology and how it impacts the academic learning, which we know now is now a strong link between what we know, frankly, about a child's psychology and frankly what happens for them in academic learning. So this has real potential, massive impact for the way in which we look at outcomes for kids.
Yeah, really well said, Jean-Claude. Thanks for adding that. Kevin, we first interacted in the world of national service, which has been, and again, outside the world of specific education, which has become a pretty important source of human capital in various things, whether it's teacher development, teacher training programs, or in some very impressive high impact tutoring programs. And now the world of national service seems like it's at risk. I'm really curious what you think about that and it's the possible impact.
Yeah, it could have a huge impact. You know, right now, my understanding is that a bunch of staff were laid off at AmeriCorps, but they
Yeah.
have not. And some grants have been impacted and have been bounced for different reasons, but there hasn't been a sort of systematic purging of grants in the program. But we were trying to calculate it this past week. Tens of thousands of AmeriCorps members are tutoring kids.
Yes.
And so we have this high impact, evidence-based strategy that helps kids. And it is driven by this national service program. If AmeriCorps goes away, tens of thousands of people are not going to be entering classrooms and helping kids learn how to read. And that is just objectively true. So it's very real. It's also, of course, there are lots of programs near and dear to our hearts that also work in schools that are AmeriCorps programs as well, that are going to have major impacts. And so national service, it's broader than education. But it serves education, and when it serves education, it serves the hardest to staff, highest need places in the country.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks. I want to ask, we're getting close to the part where they say, get up and go to the bathroom if you need to, because we're going to be landing soon. So I want to ask each of you what you're watching most carefully now. There's so much that's happened or appeared to have happened, but maybe it hasn't happened. There's a lot that's still open. So I'm really curious as we look at the federal landscape and the changes that are being wrought by the administration, what are you watching for now in the next 3 months? We promise we won't bring you back together in another 100 days to recheck, but maybe next year. But I am curious, like, what do you think? What are you watching for, and what should our friends who are listening in today be watching for? Jean-Claude, you want to give it a start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about the people in leadership in Washington. I know someone who went from help, then minority, now majority, to the Department of Education. I'm hoping the deputy actually gets confirmed. So I really am hoping that there's a plan that it emerges that tells us exactly how folks are thinking about the way forward. Yes, revolution, but let's think about, frankly, how we build a better IES, how we think about assessment, how we think about data and accountability, how we think about, frankly, how we support our state chiefs in doing the work and supporting the superintendents. So I really am going to be watching for who comes into the Department of Ed, frankly, how they're thinking about building moving forward. I mean, that is the work that needs to be done. That would make me sleep at night a lot better.
Robin, what are you watching with
I think I'm watching the other end of the
with hope and with fear?
Yeah, I think I'm watching the other end of the spectrum from Jean-Claude. I'm watching to see what states and communities will do, and particularly in the next few months, what the first few states that make proposals to the feds about what they want to be doing, what they say, and whether they're bringing exciting, invigorating, bipartisan ideas to the table, things that will really move achievement for kids. And I'm looking to see whether communities start to organize, whether the advocates start to organize around a set of productive ideas that they want to see come to fruition. Really hopeful sign for me is some work that's been going on. And again, Denise raised Tennessee, but there's some other important work going in Tennessee around student report cards and information for families so that the grades that they're getting for their kids reflect actual mastery of learning or not, and things like that. And that would be a game changer in my view, will help drive change. So I'm looking to locals to show what needs to be done.
Terrific. Mike, what are you watching for with some hope and with some concern?
Yeah, no, I
And
think
what would you suggest our friends be watching for
be
as well?
watching. Look, we talked a little bit about it, but the reconciliation bill, this is the big tax and spending bill that the Republicans are working on that they can pass without any Democrats and are expected to do so. It has the question about whether there will be Medicaid cuts or other social spending cuts. There's also a question of whether it's going to include a private school choice tax credit program, which it could. That could be a $10 billion program to fund private school choice everywhere, including in the blue states. And those blue states are going to have to decide sort of how to respond to it and whether to kind of let that play out in their states or whether to try to fight it. That's in Congress. Across the street at the Supreme Court, there's a big hearing next week on whether religious charter schools are not only permissible, but possibly required in states that have non-religious charter schools, which could completely upend that big sector as well. So there's some big stuff coming, and it's not just from the Trump administration.
Gotcha. Denise, what are you watching?
Well, I think one of my biggest concerns, I have three. One is really concerned about the stories that we won't be hearing relative to families facing discrimination in education system, whether that's kids needing special education support and just aren't getting it from their schools, to outright racial animus and discrimination to young children in schools or girls for that matter. Very concerned that without these regional offices for the Office of Civil Rights, that we're going to be just plain out missing things. And we all know that when you are unseen, which is, why we are such big proponents of data and what the civil rights data collection could do. So data, absolutely. To that point, I am not as hopeful as Mike, but boy, would that be great if they reconstituted IES. I mean, both the House and the Senate have been working on a reauthorization for years now, and they were in a good place. So, let's take a look at that and see if that's something out there. And then I think the last thing for me is along the lines of what Robin said. We're absolutely going to be looking at states and what they ask for as well as what they don't ask for. Our coalitions are going to have their eyes on the prize, which is about increasing student achievement across the country. And we want to put folks on notice. If you're doing good things, we are going to applaud you and support you. And where you're not courageous, we are going to make sure that we have folks on the ground giving you that courage.
Great. Kevin?
Building off some of that, I think I'll be interested in seeing how the department deals with waiver requests, and in particular, the extent to which they continue to hold the line on accountability and assessment as part of whatever they are granting on waivers. But in an administration that seems disinclined to have a real congressional leadership plan, most of the activity, I think, is going to happen via executive action. In the case of education, it's going to happen via states going for waivers. So that's like the sort of epicenter. And then a related thing is I do think there's huge opportunity for states to step up and show leadership. And arguably, they've had a lot of autonomy and ability to do that before, but maybe just all of the discussion around state leadership provides a new level of cover that allows them to step forward with more ambitious plans. And so I think there's real opportunity, and it will be interesting to see if some of them take up that chance to help kids.
We had a panel recently of a bunch of state chiefs, great conversation. To listen to them, you'd think that they were eagerly awaiting this opportunity and ready to jump on it. And one just hopes that that's true. I want to ask about two last things in our final rounds. One, we've had a bunch of questions in the Q&A box about how people are thinking about Head Start. There's a reorg part of Head Start. There's a funding part of Head Start. How are you thinking about the changes to Head Start and what they may mean? And that's obviously particularly of interest to folks who focus on early childhood learning. Jean-Claude, you want to start out on Head Start?
Yeah, I know all of the details about what's coming, but I agree with a lot of the comments made in the question, the Q&A, that early learning is a critical part of what we need to do in education. Again, as a former superintendent, we had 3-year-old programs, 4-year-old program. Head Start was a part of our portfolio, so making sure we keep that whole. We don't have to keep it exactly the same way, but we have to support kids, frankly, at those at the age level. Otherwise, we're not going to have the outcomes we're looking for.
Yeah, Mike, as somebody of a slightly more conservative bent here, I'm curious how you think about both structural changes to Head Start administration and potential attacks on funding.
Yeah, I haven't been following this one either. I mean, first of all, look, this is a decision that should be made by Congress, right? And so anything that happens from the executive branch that, where they would talk about not spending money that's been appropriated would make me very nervous. That sounds anti-constitutional. So that's a big concern. Look, I think there's always, for many years, been a sense that Head Start could be more effective than it is. There's always been a debate about how much it should lean into being a pre-K program versus a child care program. Certainly, I think there's folks on the right who believe that, it's good that we have a mixed model in pre-K in terms of provision. In other words, there's school choice. It's not just Head Start. It's also, church basements, and it's also, other kinds of mom and pop places, and that, should there be some way for some of those other groups to get access to some of these funds. But look, all of those are great meaty policy questions, and there's an organization in our country that's supposed to deal with those. It's called the United States Congress.
Denise, any thoughts on Head Start?
I'm really, the ongoing situation right now where Head Start programs are actually closing because they cannot access the portal at HHS for payments. That infrastructure problem, because they have, let go so many employees at the Department of Health and Human Services who actually knew how to get the payments out. That is quite disturbing. Alongside, there's these rumors that the president's budget that's pending would also gut Head Start. So I think there's absolute reasons to be concerned, but it's such a shame because there are a lot of innovations going on at the local level here in DC using Head Start, like Jean-Claude was doing to help fund free universal 3- and 4-year-olds. That's still a very active and thriving and robust program for kiddos here in DC. So, and across the country, other folks have been innovative with the use of Head Start funds. Look, we have seen this since the pandemic because we do not have a robust, thriving, well-informed, science-based early learning program across the country. So many families have been left out of the economy because they can't go to work, because they don't have childcare. Head Start is not just a childcare program. It is actually a very robust early learning program, and we need to do everything that we can to protect it.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to come back to something that Robin said early in the conversation, and Mike also mentioned. I think if there's maybe one thing that this administration seems to believe about education, because I agree with all there's not really that much of a plan of how to make things better. I'm for creative destruction. I'm just curious where the creative part is so far. But I think if there's one big idea that's coming through, which has a lot of appeal in a lot of different ways, or maybe it's a combination of two ideas, it is school choice and parent engagement, parent empowerment, pick your word. Robin, you started this, so let me come back to you to say a little bit more about this. And I'd like to just go around and hear people on this question of the intersection of school choice and parent engagement, and what possibilities that holds.
Well, you can't ignore the fact that people want choices. Families want choices. They want options. You see explosion of legislation in Republican states, but the demand is there. I think that the tricky thing is figuring out how to provide them those options in a meaningful way. Choice without quality is not much of a choice, and we've heard that from families over and over again. So that's the rub. I think part of the puzzle here is as private choice expands, what are we going to do about public schools? They don't just go away. That's where most of the kids are. Many families choose district schools, even if they're low performing for many reasons. And so, we've got to have strategies for allowing public schools to compete with privates, freeing up districts from mandates that hold them back from providing effective choices, creating avenues for public charter schools, but also district choice schools of choice. All of that is part of what needs to happen. And then on the quality side, the choice has to be accompanied by measures of quality, attention to quality, accountability for quality. We can't shy away from those kinds of conversations. But yeah, it's a fool's errand to ignore the fact that families want options. That's been a trend for a very long time, and so that in my view, that's where R's and D's could be coming together for some interesting kinds of conversations if we allowed that to happen.
Thank you, Robin. Kevin, I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this intersection of what Robin was talking about, and the intersection of choice, the instinct towards choice, and the appeal of choice, the parent engagement, parent empowerment, and at the same time paying attention to quality. How do you think about all that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, just on parent engagement, I say if we're going to be populist, let's be populist and let's give the people what they want. There is an agenda. I put this in the chat. There's an agenda of things that poll at 70% or higher and that are backed by research and evidence to improve outcomes, science of reading and phonics-driven literacy, high dosage tutoring, high quality career pathways, pay teachers more and spend more money, intra-public choice, like all of these, the people want them and they're good. And so we should give people the things that they want and that are good. And I do think that within the choice sector, if you want to have real choice, then you have to have real information. It's hard to make choices without information. And so we have to maintain a true commitment to providing information to people.
Jean-Claude, how do you
John,
think?
I mean, we can have an hour and a half on this one. So
We,
first of
we will. I think somebody dropped in the chat. We're going to have a whole bunch of sessions on this.
First of all, every school should be a school of choice. I know that may be utopian in my view, but choice without transportation, without real access, is a false choice. I've seen that throughout my career, where you can have an amazing school of choice, but these parents can't afford to go to take the subway, train, whatever it may be. They go to the school in the corner, which is what typically happens in school system because they can't afford to go anyplace else. So it's not a matter of them not wanting to, but they can't afford to. So choice without transportation is a false choice.
Mike?
Yeah, look, I would just add to say, the hope of those of us that strongly support choice is that the traditional public schools will compete, right? And will try to get better to keep parents and win parents back. And I think that's truer now, more now than ever. I mean, if you ask teachers, for example, what's going on in our schools right now, it's really bad in there, right? I mean, you've got discipline issues are very serious. You've got kids checked out because they're on their phones. Parents want places that are safe, where their kids are engaged, where they're being challenged. They don't want schools to say, hey, sorry, we're not going to let you take an advanced math class because equity. But instead say, no, we're going to, everybody who's ready for advanced math, we're going to make sure that kids from all backgrounds are screened to find kids who can succeed here, but we're going to challenge every kid no matter where they're at. These are simple things, right? But our school system has almost in some places seemed to go overboard to try to drive parents out by saying, we're not going to discipline kids. We're going to inflate grades. We're going to let them play around on their phones during the day. I mean, so, if we do some of just the nuts and bolts stuff right within traditional public schools, I think you'll see some of this demand go away. Because parents also in the polling that Kevin talks about, parents love the idea of having a neighborhood public school. And I think a lot of us, we look for school choice when it's not working, when the neighborhood public school isn't working, but we'd much prefer for that neighborhood public school to be a great option.
Yeah. Denise, you get the last word on this
Oh
one.
my goodness.
Come on, it's a lot of pressure, my friend.
It is a lot of pressure. Look, I'm a parent. I've got 2 kids in DC public schools, and I would love to, get inside the doors of those schools and visit every once in a while. But Mike's right. Many times school systems are just not as welcoming to parents as they need to be. But look, we need an entire parental engagement strategy because it's not just about choice. It's about the information, like Kevin and Mike said, about what is the quality of the school that I'm sending them to. It is about safety and how safe are schools. Parents want to know this information, but very few states, or for that matter, local school districts, are doing a good job around parental engagement and giving parents the information that they want to have and they deserve to know about how their kiddos are doing in school and what kind of learning environment they're being exposed to. So parents want to know these things, parents want to be partners, and we just need more school districts and states to act like that and really propose ways for parents to become a part of the solution because they absolutely have a right to be.
Right. You landed that plane beautifully, Denise. Thank you all, Jean-Claude, Mike, Kevin, Robin, Denise. Thank you again to Sierra and to Hillary behind the scenes for making this session come together. This was a really great conversation. I loved it. I already am looking forward to the next time we convene to see how we're doing, and for you guys once again to sort of separate what's noise and what's important, and help us refine the plot of what's really going on with education and more broadly for kids and families in this country. And with that, I think I will thank all of you again and turn it back to Hillary to close us out.
I will just quickly echo that thanks, and will say to our audience, please take the evaluation survey. In addition to the evaluation survey, if you think you're going to use anything that you learned today, we would love to hear about it. And I've just dropped the link for that in the chat. And I will also say, please consider joining us for one of the upcoming sessions. I am also sharing the link for those sessions in the chat. We have next week at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, a part of our Kindergarten Matters series on making effective elementary P3 principles the expectation, not the exception. On May 6th, we have a session on Young Mathematicians Initiative and Early Math based out of York, Pennsylvania. And also on May 6th, later in the day, we have a session on schools as safe spaces. And so we hope that you will join us for one of our upcoming sessions. And thank you very much to our panel for today.